All right, thanks for joining me today. In this episode, I'll be talking a little bit about the beginning, how it all got started. This is a discussion on, of course, the Gospel of Mark, more specifically Mark 1:1, very famous verse. Be going over trying to do some YouTube presentation in this video. Here we go. We'll just go over the era of the text, the era of the earliest versions of the Gospel of Mark that are in existence. Okay, I'm going to try to switch over. All right, here we go. This is a page showing some of the earliest versions of the Gospel of Mark. Most important to note is we're talking 2nd and 3rd century, 300, 330, 400, 400. Some are complete, some are not. Here's a picture of one, very early. Codex Vaticanus, a little later. I'll just zip through these just so you can get a visual of what they look like in the original Greek. Alexandrinus Rescriptus. Okay, here's another early version. Gospel of Mark, Arche. Here's a digital version saying the Gospel of Mark, and the first word is Arche. So we see that this first word is what we're going to be focusing on today. And we'll go over, have a look at the definition, and think of how it applies to this sentence. All right, Arche is defined as, number one, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So by definition number one here, we could see that it's the beginning or the origin. So another way to think of it would be the origin of the gospel of Jesus Christ. The origin, yet it's almost always translated as the beginning. It's also a valid translation to say the origin. Next up, we have definition number two, which is the person or thing that commences, or the person or thing, the first person or thing in a series, the leader. So by this definition, number two, we could think of the beginning of the gospel, the origin of gospel of Jesus Christ, or the gospel that the first gospel in a series of gospels. And that makes sense because Mark, of course, is known to be the earliest version by textual analysis. So by definition two, it makes sense as well because we're talking about the first thing in a series, the first gospel in a series of gospels that would evolve over time. Okay, now by the third definition, it also works as well. We've got that by which anything begins to be the origin or the active cause. So under this definition, we see that this Gospel of Mark, this story, is the thing which causes the gospel to come into being. It's the thing that makes the gospel happen, makes the future versions happen. It is the beginning, it is the origin story. And I will argue with my Primitive Markan Priority theory that this story is actually the thing which gives rise to the church as we know it. All right, so back to this presentation. So we have an overview of the era of the text. It's commonly known that the name Gospel of Mark is not original. It is, of course, in all the versions we've seen, which date to 300 or 400 AD. But another thing to note is that Mark 1:1 cannot be original either. And as we saw, it is sort of a title, a book title itself, the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. This is not original to the original text, the text versions that would exist uh, way before 300 AD, way before 200. So, of course, we have four versions of the gospel. We've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark being the earliest, Mark being the beginning, the origin, the first in a series, the one that gave rise to the others, as we've just discussed. So, now one interesting thing to note is that understanding this, we could see that the church actually, at a very early date, preserved the original version of the story. We have four versions, others that would follow, that would develop, and theology would, of course, develop out of them. But the church itself preserved the original story, which is quite amazing when you think about it. Okay, so how did the original Mark begin? It began like this. If you imagine Mark just finished writing it, he wants to read it aloud to his first listeners. He goes to a local assembly, a synagogue, to his group, his friends, whoever received this for the first time. This is how it began. He sat down and he said, "Hey, everybody, listen, I've got a story to tell you. Here we go. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger before your face who will prepare your way, the voice of one crying in the wilderness." This is how the story began. This is very important to realize that the title Gospel of Mark was added later. And in fact, Mark 1:1 was added later when there were multiple versions of the Gospel of Mark. So the beginning of the Gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is not original. It was added a little bit later, not much later. And there is also some debate on Mark 1:1 if the Son of God was original to Mark 1:1, that is, or if this was appended as well. But for this discussion, it's not really relevant whether or not it said the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ or included the Son of God. The fact is that the whole Mark 1:1 sentence was used as a heading or as a title even before the Gospel of Mark. All right. Thank you for listening to this brief little discussion of the beginning of the Gospel of Mark and Mark 1:1. Obviously, this verse gave rise to the church, and as a part of Primitive Markan Priority theory, the church always had the Gospel of Mark because the Gospel of Mark predated and came before the church, and the church developed from the Gospel of Mark. Thank you for listening. Please, if you have liked this discussion, like, subscribe, ask questions. I'm always willing to take questions or develop any thoughts that might be inspired from this discussion. Thank you.